Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. This video is going to be a lot longer than most of my usual content, as I want to cover a lot of issues currently faced by our military. I'm going to be going through various topics including recruitment, military assets, over-reliance on America. I'll be talking about a lot of assets included in our military, and I'll be going through some things including purchases of the B-21 Raider. It's going to be a bit of a video, so if you got some snacks or something on hand, probably be best to use them here. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. The Australian military has, in recent years, been falling into a state of disrepair, and our operational capabilities are slowly fading away. For instance, only one of our 6 submarines is in an operational capacity, and we have recently retired one of our frigates due to a lack of personnel. Despite having programs that are in the pipeline to fix these issues, most of the major projects are still decades off their full delivery, and even projects like the current frigate acquisition that should in theory start delivering vessels within a couple of years will still likely experience delays from the government not making any decision within a timely manner. In the midst of this, America has isolated itself from many allies, and its guarantee of being a major superpower is waning, especially in the rise of China and America's increased isolationist policies, many of which raise the question as to how credible of an ally America would be if, say, Australia were to request their aid in a war against China. Now, this doesn't mean we should throw the baby out with the bathwater, especially due to strategic significance of Australia to America. However, we should realise that we need our own capabilities and systems in place to defend our nation should a war begin. So for the first segment, I'll be discussing strategies and how Australian planning for all scenarios have direct United States support. This has led to us building a military designed to slot into a US-led task force as a supporting element. In this planning, we have placed the requirements on one Amphibious Ready Group, or ARG, which we are capable of operating at a great cost to our operational capacity of other military assets in other roles, and purchase of aircraft like the F-35, which despite being very capable, exist in small numbers across our country. Other planning is based off the assumption that our adversaries would either lack the capability to match us in technology, quantity, or effectiveness with their assets, and that we would only need small-scale operations and deployments to effectively deal with any adversarial threats. Anything more than that, we would simply request support or help from America or another ally in the region to come and assist with the problem. However, the issue clearly not being addressed here is, what if we lack support? What if Australia is forced to act on its own and can't get our allies to bring their capabilities to the table? And this is where the dilemma emerges. Australia has a good military by basic metrics. Our soldiers are well trained, some of the best in the world even. Our aircraft are cutting edge, our ships are rather good. However, we don't have enough to defend ourselves for prolonged times, nor sustain any serious losses. And if we were to deploy an ARG, it would take up the majority of our surface fleet and gut our overall capability, should we need to carry out any other operations. We also lack a long-range strike capability, which has been largely left on the drawing board due to a lack of interest from the government to raise tensions with China or other nations in the region. Currently, we have only 3 warships that have a serious number of vertical launch tubes, these being the air warfare destroyers, which carry 48. Our Anzac-class frigates hold somewhere between 6 to 8 missiles each, with the focus being on air defense weapon systems instead of long-range strike. In other words, one Chinese Renhai-class destroyer would offer more strike capability than our entire navy. We need to consider the place that strategic strike takes up in our military, and build our defense force to be capable of carrying out long-range attacks to hold other nations at bay and eliminate their logistics, military bases, ports, and airfields. This would include potentially developing long-range hypersonic or cruise missiles that could be fired from strategic bombers, warships, or land-based assets, but would also require a restructure of several branches of our armed forces in order to work, for instance getting more warships with larger missile payloads. Next, we also need to reconsider how we intend to use our army in a future conflict. Right now, our army is being built around providing an amphibious ready group the assets required to operate overseas, and some light units, mostly Bushmaster vehicles, against adversaries who would likely not have the assets to eliminate heavy or even in some cases light armour. However, the intended purpose, especially in the light of the Albanese government offering the Australian troops to help ensure a ceasefire in Ukraine, would suggest that we need to expand our ground forces in order to allow for greater capabilities against adversaries with more reliable equipment or a larger, more competent military. If indeed the Australian government wants to have a larger military for operations in other nations, we would have to expand our Army's infantry fighting vehicle capabilities and long-range deployment. This would also potentially place a requirement for bases in allied nations or consenting nations, for instance, let's say Poland, Germany, or France. In addition to this, Australia should be looking into expanding its strategic lift capabilities, which would allow us to deploy these forces at longer ranges. These changes would be focused on our Navy and Air Force, which I will discuss later on. As for our Air Force, we should be looking into increased integration of drone systems, along with the expansion of our already existing fighter jet fleet, and potentially consideration as to whether or not it would be viable to operate F-35 Joint Strike Fighters from our landing helicopter docks. Other things that should be examined, and linking in with my previous point, would be purchasing more strategic lift aircraft, for instance the C-17 Globemaster. And for the Navy, little really needs to be changed, beyond simply procuring the assets that have been highlighted by the Defence Strategic Review. I'll talk about this at greater length when I get onto the segment about Navy, but the main point I'll make here is that the need to transition to allow for more long-range strike weapons and increasing lift capabilities. As I said about the Army, we need the capability to deploy assets further away from Australia, and the Navy is an important aspect of this framework. And finally, we need to strengthen ties with our regional partners and allies. Creating strong defensive ties and alliances is vital to our security, but also allows us to focus on certain areas within our military whilst being able to rely on others at a time of crisis. Current plans to increase operational capability with New Zealand and Papua New Guinea are very important, but in my opinion they don't go far enough. A concept that could be considered is a Pacific NATO equivalent, with countries like New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Japan, the Philippines, South Korea, Vietnam, and Indonesia. These are already friendly nations and allies of Australia, which only makes it more logical to further our relationships with them, especially against what may one day become a common risk or adversary. In addition, we should seek to increase interoperability between Papua New Guinea and New Zealand and Australia, so our forces would be more capable of operating together in defence of our territory. For instance, neither Papua New Guinea or New Zealand have powerful militaries. However, if placed under a unified framework, their defence forces would be able to offer a greater capability under a coalition of allies. With the topic of strategy out of the way, I'll now move on to the next part, recruitment. This is one of the most important aspects of our military, since no matter how much equipment you have access to, you can't use any of it without the personnel required to man the systems or vehicles within the military force. Currently, the Australian military is failing to reach its stated goals regarding personnel deployment, and as has been made public last year, an Anzac-class frigate was retired due to a lack of operating personnel. Strangely enough, this is during a time when the government claims that 28% more people have applied to join up. One of the biggest causes of this is wait times, something that the Albanese government has attempted to fix by bringing in a new contractor to reduce the time to 100 days, and the results speak for themselves, with wait times currently being about 265 days on average. This wait time is quite frankly ridiculous. This means that people are waiting around 9 months to be told whether or not they can qualify to enter the military. In this time, a person could potentially get another, possibly higher paying job, a partner, which could impact their decision to not join. Technically, given the fact that the female gestation period is 9 months, theoretically have a child, a home loan, and buy a house and go, I'm happy living here, or to simply decide that they simply do not want to join up. This is at a time where we are undergoing a cost of living crisis, so a person seeking employment may go with a more safe option, which guarantees a job in less time. This means that the Australian military is not competitive in the job market, and it drives people away, albeit not being as bad as New Zealand's military, which I'll talk about at later points. In addition, the government has placed exceedingly high standards on its potential recruits. If, say, you have visited a psychologist or a counsellor in your final year of high school due to anxiety, you're instantly disqualified from joining the army. Another example is a friend of mine who's double jointed. He's capable of carrying 30 kilograms of steel from one side of our facility to another and pulling trolleys with more than 300 kilograms of metal in them, yet he was rejected because of a double jointed arm being too weak. What I'm trying to say here is that the government is hell-bent on making an army of extremely capable people, missing the point that we need enough people in the first place to operate as a military. We also need the government to reduce wait times by a drastic degree, so that the military will be more competitive within the job market and allow for recruits to enter service more quickly. Right now, we have the people applying to sign up for the military, and sufficient interest. The changes that need to be made, though, is reducing these time periods. However, that being said, if these decisions are made, it is quite likely that we will be able to fix our recruitment issues and begin to expand upon our defense force's size simply with these points. Now, for the next segment, which will focus on the armed forces. The first branch that I'll be covering is the Army. The Australian Army is currently based around operating an amphibious ready group, with 129 Hanwha Redback infantry fighting vehicles planned to be procured, 211 Rheinmetall Boxers, 45 Huntsman howitzers, 72 M1A2 SEP V3 tanks, and 40 HIMARS multiple rocket launch systems. In addition, we have the capability to operate 763 or so Bushmaster infantry mobility vehicles, and we do have about 180 or so ASLAVs, or Australian light armoured vehicles. This offers us a capable force for our landing vessels, and offers more than enough capability for small-scale deployments against lightly armed hostile forces. However, there are gaps that need filling. For instance, increasing our armoured vehicle fleet would allow us the capability to take losses in any conflict, and deploy more assets across multiple theatres. With this in mind, we should attempt to establish a larger land force, with a focus on additional expeditionary units that can be rapidly deployed across the world and provide a capable force against any possible adversary. So this segment was initially rather quick, simply being a brief overview of our air defense systems, and saying that it was important that the government simply accelerate the acquisition of the NASAMS air defense system, or NASAMS. I'm not quite sure what the actual way to pronounce that is. However, whilst at Avalon, I was able to talk to a family friend, Gordon Arthur. He's a freelance journalist who travels the world, going to exercises such as Talisman Sabre, and has had the opportunity to ask many high-up officials questions regarding our military. Gordon raised the question as to what the current plan NASAMS was. The response provided was far less than satisfactory, with the official saying that whilst the program may be continued, it also may be scrapped in favour of another system. And this is where I will vary a little bit from my original script. This is, frankly, pathetic. What we've learned in the last few years, especially in Ukraine, is that air defences are vital to protection of a nation. Without them, an adversary would be able to strike any target they wish in Australia, be it military or civilian. If the government does not choose to invest or procure a multi-layered air defense system, then it will be a massive disregard for both the lives of our men and women and the civilians within our nation. Whether we procure NASAMS, the Patriot, or some other asset, this is a decision that must be made within a reasonable timeframe, and frankly should have been decided on years ago. The big issue with this, and I say this, and I want to make this adamantly clear, is that we have seen countries like Russia not have any regard for civilian lives. Russia in Ukraine has launched missiles into Ukrainian cities, hitting hospitals, blowing up funerals, and carrying out pretty much every form of terrorism with these kinds of weapons that you can imagine. Why is it that our government has not decided that perhaps it might be an important choice to invest in an air defense system? Rant's over. An additional topic that needs to be discussed is a land-based anti-ship missile capability. Currently, the Australian government is looking at either procuring the Strike Master system, which is effectively a Bushmaster with an anti-ship missile launcher mounted on the back, or the HIMARS system. The system being procured, at least in my opinion, should be capable of being built here in Australia, so we can have it as a domestic capability, and reduce our reliance upon America to deny an adversary access to sea lanes. In addition, the systems that are compatible with the Strike Master double as cruise missiles, which means that it potentially offers more promise than the HIMARS as a missile launch platform, which can utilize cruise missiles, but it can only fire one at a time. This would also function in the future if Australia were to purchase a land-based version of the Tomahawk, which could potentially extend our strike capability against any potential adversaries. Now move on to the Air Force, which has had several changes. For instance, we should be investing into an additional squadron of F-35 Joint Strike Fighters to increase our deployment capability and ability to support operations overseas. In addition, we must push the Loyal Wingman or the Ghost Bat program into service and accelerate its deployment of combat roles. As of right now, the Ghost Bat is only capable of carrying out reconnaissance. This means that the asset is effectively useless if we were to go to war with another country, as we'll be filling out a role that literally everything within our military can already do. That being said, the Loyal Wingman program, or the Ghost Bat, has provided a lot of potential and capability that it offers, but it has to be handled correctly. Whilst writing this segment of the script, Boeing has announced that the Ghost Bat will be testing air-to-air weapon systems by the end of this year, which is good, but it means very little unless it provides results in actual capacity. I also believe it to be important that we consider how assets such as helicopters in our military, the main reason for which is the evolving nature of anti-air missile systems and weapons. Helicopters still have a use, but to think that nothing has changed or the doctrine doesn't need to be reconsidered is a fool's errand. Additionally, we should be continuing to look at drone systems like the Strix, which has provided potential to give a very potent capability in a relatively small platform. We also need to be expanding our strategic airlift fleet and capabilities so that our military can deploy larger forces overseas at any given time and respond to threats or risks within most regions. This is an important concept because if we anticipate any operations in the European theatre or even try to help our allies in the immediate region, we will need the capability to 1. Get our personnel to the combat zones, and 2. Keep them supplied with relevant equipment and needed to sustain operations for any periods of time. The next part of our military that I'll be touching on is the Navy, which is by far in the most need of restructuring and reallocating of resources. Decades of incompetence have led to this point, where we are not only lacking a full fleet of warships, but 5 of our 6 submarines are inoperable, and the current plans for a life of type extension, or LOTE for short, has been very clear that it will not have any serious impact on our aging submarine fleet. This is a serious issue, as it means that we lack a credible military force. Should we either come under attack from a hostile nation, or need to carry out any roles, we will lack the assets to operate for extended times at any range. In case of casualties, our military would be swiftly attrited, with a single frigate representing about 10% of our fleet, a destroyer lost 33% of our fleet, and an LHD 50. These issues have been recognised by the Defence Strategic Review, which recommended the investment into the General Purpose Frigate, which will replace a large portion of the Hunter class frigates and the current Anzac class. This frigate will either be the Miko frigate, produced by Germany, or the Megami class, which will be built by Japan. Whilst I do have a preference for the Megami, and Japan has stated that they'll prioritise Australian ship production over their own, and that it would begin almost immediately, both ships are suitable for the roles we intend for them to fill. What needs to be done is for the government to make the choice as to which vessel is best for the Australian military as soon as possible and finalise the deal. Right now, all delays only hurt our military by preventing us from getting this capability sooner. Next, we have the Arafura Offshore Patrol Vessel, which I've already covered on my channel in my most watched video. This ship has had its initial order of 20 cut back to 6, where it will work alongside a vessel called the Minor War Vessel as a anti-mine asset. What this ship is yet to actually be announced, but it's likely they'll be a corvette type asset. That, however, leaves the question as to who would be providing it or what nation's vessels would be seen as meeting the criteria for such a program. The issue here is that there is no replacement vessel for the conceptually flawed Arafura, which leaves Australia with a massive capability gap, as the only current option we have is the current Cape class patrol vessels, which are equipped with a very small 25mm gun and no other offensive capabilities. It should be made as a priority, along with obtaining the general purpose frigate, that we make a decision on the vessel in order to get a proper result delivered in a meaningful time frame. With this out of the way, we also have procurement of 3 types of amphibious vessels: a light, a medium, and a heavy. The light vessels will be procured to replace the Lark. The mediums will offer a range of 2,000 nautical miles and be capable of carrying 90 tons. Thus, it can carry 1 Abrams main battle tank or infantry fighting vehicles, 2 Bushmasters, or 4 HIMARS missile launch systems. The heavy landing craft will offer the capability of up to 500 tons of equipment, including up to 6 M18A2 SEPV-3 main battle tanks, 11 infantry fighting vehicles, or 26 HIMARS. These ships will offer a capability boost for our navy, especially regarding strategic lift, and allow us to deploy forces within the region with a higher numbers and greater capacity. The issue that such ships face, however, is that they are not heavily armed. So though to come across an adversary vessel or forces that are heavily dug in, there is little capability they can bring to the table. This is why the minor war vessel is such an important asset. It would be able to provide support and protection against drones, missile threats, and hostile vessels. In addition, it would be able to provide cover fire for landing operations and strike capabilities if equipped with the Naval Strike Missile, which can double as a surface-to-surface asset. The next assets that we will discuss are the Hunter class. These vessels, as I have said several times, are not particularly good assets for our military in its current state. They're dedicated anti-submarine vessels, which reduces their capability to operate in alternate roles. Whilst they do carry a good missile payload, it isn't as much as it would be if, let's say, you remove the requirement for the anti-submarine weaponry. However, we have reduced the fleet from 9 to 10 warships down to 6, so it does free up money and resources for other vessels. In addition, if we are to procure all the aforementioned assets in a reasonable time frame, they'll be quite valuable for a fleet, especially if we were to operate an amphibious ready group in waters off an adversary's coast. And for the final warship in our fleet, we have the Hobart class air warfare destroyers. The Hobart class is the largest warship in our military as of right now, and it carries the most powerful payload, basing around 48 vertical launch cells. Now, the vessel is quite capable, but it is hampered by a lack of numbers, with only 3 vessels being within Australia's Defence Force, and unfortunately with no intention to purchase any more of them or up-arm the vessels to enhance their capability in a potential conflict. Although the option there still remains for the government should they choose to accept any of it. This means that for a vessel of their size, they are under-equipped and lack the full capability. In addition, their lack of numbers further reduces their effectiveness due to the fact that we simply cannot deploy them in significant numbers anywhere in the world. In effect, they'll only be relevant for defending 1 or 2 key cities or supporting an amphibious ready group. Beyond that, they have no real capability in a modern conflict. We should consider purchasing more of the Hobart class, or at the very least upgrading them to carry a more powerful payload. However, the issue is that procuring them will likely take the better part of a decade, and to get any significant result for our fleet, which raises the importance of the unmanned surface vessels intended to be purchased. These vessels will carry 32 missile launch cells each, and will be optionally crewed, allowing us to bring additional missile launch systems to the table against a possible adversary. The government, under the Defence Strategic Review, intends to procure 3 of the vessels, which would increase the missile cells operated by a fleet by a total of 96. However, there is no time frame currently established, and no contract put forwards thus far. Having watched Australian weapon procurement for the better part of a decade, I have no faith that they would get the assets delivered within a reasonable time frame. With these assets covered, I'll now move on to our strategic lift fleet, which covers HMAS Chills, Canberra and Adelaide. Currently, it seems that the government is divesting in Chills under C2200. Now, this will leave a large capability gap, as Chills can carry up to 150 vehicles, in addition to an onboard force of helicopters to assist with strategic lift capabilities. However, there is likely a reason for this decision making. This being that we currently do not require a vessel of this size to carry out the roles that are already offered by assets like Canberra or Adelaide, except in a greater capacity. In addition, whilst operating an amphibious ready group is important, we should be able to bring other capabilities to the table. For instance, let's say you needed to invade the Solomon Islands for some reason or another. You wouldn't need 150 vehicles, including tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and multiple rocket launch systems, and IMVs, or infantry mobility vehicles. In fact, the only countries that currently operate armoured assets within our immediate region are New Zealand and Papua New Guinea, and both nations are our allies, meaning they pose no threat to us or as strategic or military concerns. What has to be considered is the use case of an intermediate force, which we currently have no way of carrying out. If we need to hold an island to secure an airfield, Right now, with the force of several infantry fighting vehicles or assets, the only way of doing such a thing is by deploying a $100 million warship with its escort fleet with 10 times that number of vehicles. As you can see, this is clearly not proportional. What might have been achieved by a smaller vessel, for instance the heavy landing craft, won't be achieved by Chul's. In addition, it has a much smaller helicopter carrying capacity than Canberra and Adelaide, along with a lower level of versatility in its roles, in particular being able to house aircraft on board, which I'll discuss next. To add to all these factors, Chul's takes away from the limited number of personnel that we currently have, requiring a permanent crew of 158 people and carrying a standard force of 350 personnel, whilst having large maintenance costs and carrying a large number of vehicles at all times. And finally, it was procured as an asset to fill the gaps that were experienced when HMAS Canberra and Adelaide were procured. These factors combined lead to the Chul's slowly being removed from service in favour of other assets, albeit it is taking time. It won't just be removed from service immediately. Now we come to the Canberra and Adelaide, which are our largest surface assets. These are landing helicopter docks of the Canberra class and are built by BAE and Navantia. They are the centerpiece of our defence strategy, with most of our naval assets being procured to serve the role of forming an amphibious ready group, which would revolve around them. Both ships are very capable assets and can carry 1,000 embarked personnel, 110 vehicles, along with 12 M1A2 Abrams tanks. They also have medical facilities on board and can operate 18 helicopters, with 6 operating simultaneously from the flight deck. However, there are some ways to potentially increase the effectiveness of the assets. One such solution could be to equip them with a surface-to-air missile system, potentially similar to the ones found on American LHDs and LPDs, or landing platform docks. Or, at the very least, improve the air defense systems to have a close-in weapon system against drones and missiles. An additional option that could be considered for the ships is to upgrade them to be capable of landing F-35 Lightning Joint Strike Fighters on their decks. This would require a reconstruction of the ship's surface, so it can withstand the heat of an F-35's engine at full thrust. This would offer the capability to have a permanent 5th generation fighter presence with our naval assets at all times, and it would increase our fleet's capacity to operate without support from land-based aircraft. However, the issues are also quite significant. For instance, the program would likely take several months to complete and would cost an estimated $500 million for each ship, and for such a cost we could theoretically buy a dedicated carrier instead. On top of this, it would cause other issues. For instance, the F-35s would require more hangar space for the aviation fuel, bombs, missiles, etc. And this would mean that the LHDs would lose out on their intended role as amphibious vessels, whilst making the ships a higher priority target than they already are for any adversary forces. Ultimately, there are advantages, but the costs and drawbacks of such a program do make it, at least in my opinion, to be unworthy of the benefits. However, that being said, if the government was able to do it cheaper or get a system on board that can carry out a similar role, such as, let's say, a navalized version of the Loyal Wingman, that could be quite a capable asset to have on board. Now, going back to the end of my video, we arrive at the Collins-class submarine and AUKUS. Now, this is likely going to be a little bit controversial, as AUKUS has been a touchy topic for a lot of Australians, especially given the current environment that has been caused by the Trump administration. There have been a lot of calls from both sides of politics, being Labor, Liberal, Greens, and even national candidates, to cancel the program, whilst an equal amount of people have been calling for it to continue. The reasons for this is mostly based on the fact that we are unlikely to obtain any submarine capability in the short to medium term, and that the costs of the program are extremely high. Now, that being said, there are issues. For instance, we have no alternative programs, so if the plan to purchase the Virginia-class submarines is scrapped, then we will simply extend the time frame for our acquisition of any submarine assets by an even larger period of time, and be forcing the already failing Collins class to remain in service for an indefinite period. There have also been arguments that Australia should purchase a vessel such as Japanese submarines, or as some have put forwards, a Son of Collins concept, which would effectively be a Collins class submarine with minor upgrades. However, the issue is that it fundamentally misses the problems with the Collins class. The Collins class is a small submarine designed for the operation in the waters and territory directly around a country in which they are based. Now, obviously, the submarines can be deployed at longer ranges to carry out missions. However, this places more stress on a submarine's frame, internal infrastructure, and that reduces the lifespan of the vessel. Think of it like you've gone out and bought a Toyota Corolla. It's a really good car by all metrics of measurement. It's relatively quick. It carries people. You have space in the boot, and you can do towing if you want. So what you then do is take a bush bashing, which completely trashes its suspension and the frame of the car. That's basically what this is. You're pushing the platform far beyond its intended purpose, which inherently causes harm to its life period, and that could be achieved by simply having a nuclear submarine. So what could be done? The answer, in my opinion, is to currently continue the current programs. However, we should also start to look at other options and place pressure on America to deliver what is promised. If we cannot get the assets delivered within a reasonable time frame, then it would be important to step away from the submarine aspect of AUKUS. However, we should continue with the collaborative side of the deal, especially research and development of hypersonic weapon systems and air defenses, amongst other technologies. Now, as a final segment, I'll discuss some issues. As I've said throughout this video, wait times for assets have experienced massive blowouts for majority of systems that are unacceptable. If the systems initially planned haven't been cancelled. Examples can be the Sky Guardian program, which was axed under the Liberal government along with the Loyal Wingman, which, despite being initially revealed in 2020, has yet to actually carry any weapon systems on board, let alone have them fully integrated into the system on a functional level. In addition, despite the whole China scare, little serious action was taken to rearm and rebuild. Under Albanese, similar issues have been brought up, including very little progress, basic changes that were being put forwards than pretty much anyone with a functioning brain, and nothing's been done beyond stripping any plans to deliver an air defense capability and the seriously delayed decision to pick a frigate to purchase, despite the Megami class seeming to be, at least in my opinion, the better option. The upcoming election seems to be a battle of mediocrity, with a coalition government that wants to throw around money as if it's going out of style, and seemingly a failure to remember that we actually need systems to launch the missiles they will be buying, whilst Labour seems hellbent on continuing its procurement at the speed of a lethargic snail. Of course, this has raised the question about other assets, which would fill the gaps currently that exist. These being assets such as the B-21, more drones, amongst other systems. The issue being is that none of them really fill the gaps. The B-21 is being procured at a very low rate, and it's estimated there are currently 6 in some stage of development, with some officials suggesting that the current rate is about 7 or so per year. In addition, the Americans have ordered an initial fleet of 100, which means it'll take at least 14 years before they even begin production of Australian aircraft, assuming that the American government would prioritise the B-21 deliveries to America over Australia. In addition, it's actually possibly even worse than that, given the fact that there are rumours that this American military may want to actually expand to a potential fleet of over 100 to 125 to maybe even as high as 200. And to add to the dilemma, the B-2 right now is not for sale. So no other Australian allies operate any strategic bombers, which effectively shuts off any hope of getting any aircraft before our submarine, frigate, and drone programs are finally operational. As I've stated before, the Loyal Wingman is yet to actually carry any functional weapon tests, let alone having the capability to carry weapons on our military assets properly integrated. The Loyal Wingman also isn't large enough to carry weapons like the Long Range Anti-Ship Missile, or LRASM for short, Joint Direct Attack Munitions, or JDAMs. This all means that our drone fleet is woefully under-equipped to carry out any functional combat capability in the immediate future. And finally, missile strike is another massive issue. As most people will tell you, including myself, Australia has a severe lack of missile strike capability. We lack any serious number of long-range missiles that can fulfill any strike missile missions. Now, this has all been pointed out as an issue from most analysts, as something that has been solved. However, this misses a deeper issue, one that most people don't talk about. We don't have anything that can carry them. Right now in the Australian Air Force, we have two kinds of aircraft that can carry these kinds of systems, the F-18 and the F-35. The F-18 can carry 4 LRASMs, and the F-35 only 2. In addition, we have only 3 ships in our Navy that can carry a significant number of cruise missiles, these being the air warfare destroyers, which as their name suggests are prioritised for air warfare. The Anzac class, on the other hand, can only carry 6 missiles apiece, with their vertical launch cells being prioritised for anti-air purposes and their quad missile launchers for anti-ship. This means that until we begin receiving the deliveries of the general purpose frigate and the Hunter class frigates, we aren't going to see any serious step up in our missile strike capabilities. And even if we were to begin stockpiling now, these systems wouldn't be of any use until all the other assets which are required to launch them are delivered. So with this in mind, what is the solution? Well, one option is to utilize the P-8 Poseidons, which the American military is currently implementing the LRASM into. These system assets can double as anti-land and surface weapons and have a range of around 370 kilometers, although it could be higher. This will be an effective medium-range missile, and the P-8 Poseidon can carry 4 of the weapons up to a range of 2,200 kilometers. As Australia regularly patrols the South China Sea with such assets, that would be a reasonable risk to any adversary force, and as Australia has a fleet of 12 of the aircraft, it would pose a risk to any naval force along with the powerful capacity to hit land targets. In addition, New Zealand will have 4 P-8s which can operate alongside Australian aircraft to further increase strike capability. Beyond this, possible procurement of the Strike Master vehicles and basing them in South China Sea within range of hostile ports or facilities, along with HIMARS launch systems, could be another option. Ultimately though, these are all stopgap measures. Australia needs a government that actually takes our defence seriously, and we the voters and the people who put the governments in power need to make sure these capabilities are provided. We need the warships delivered, and we need the Virginia class submarine to be fully delivered along with the plethora of issues that are currently being faced to be resolved. With this all being said, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and if you did, please consider leaving a like and a subscription to the channel. Thank you all so very much for watching, and I will catch you all in the next video. Once more, thank you so very much. Goodbye.